During my tenure as the executive director of NASW, I have had the remarkable privilege of accompanying delegations of social workers to 7 different countries. Each journey had its own map, each delegation its own blueprint, but the mission was the same. We wanted to learn as much as we could about the country, the culture, and the problems facing the population. Perhaps even more importantly, we wanted to meet and exchange ideas and best practices with social workers from other countries. We were interested in questions such as, how were they solving social problems? How were they educating their social work students? What could we learn from them? In each country, we discussed human rights, heroic activists, and historical perspectives, and we heard the same message over and over again. There was hope for a better future for their country and for our world. We visited places many of us had only read about in textbooks or newspapers, places like Red Square, Tiananmen Square, Robben Island, and the killing fields. We saw the favelas of Brazil, the shanty towns of South Africa, the street children of Cambodia, and the homeless in Delhi. No matter the magnitude of the problems, in each country, our social work counterparts were committed and hopeful. They said their clients, their cities, and their countries were resilient and that hope underpinned all of their work, that it was the foundation upon which their change efforts were based. When I was in Delhi, I was so struck by the people who lived on the streets of Delhi. The fact that they were living families under tarps. But each morning, the woman in the family would be there with a tree branch, sweeping the dirt around their home, and she was doing so in a bright sari, and without a doubt, with a smile on her face. When you talk about resiliency, that's a perfect example of other countries and how they live and the resiliency that they have. Well, during this conference, you will have the opportunity to hear from some of the remarkable individuals that we met during our travels. Roberto Pacheco, better known as Betho, has flown here from Rio de Janeiro. Ellen Manati has traveled from Cambodia, and Lima Bowie is from Liberia, and you'll meet her this afternoon. These speakers will help us create a kaleidoscope of hope from around the world. Hope is an important concept, not only for our profession, but for society. 4 years ago, we heard President Obama speak about the audacity of hope. And he said, "I'm not talking about blind optimism, the almost willful ignorance that thinks unemployment will go away if we just don't think about it. I'm talking about something more substantial. It's the hope of slaves sitting around a fire singing freedom songs, the hope of immigrants setting out from distant shores, hope in the face of difficulty, hope in the face of uncertainty, the audacity of hope. In the end, that is the greatest gift, the bedrock of this nation, a belief in things not seen, a belief that there are better days ahead." End of quote. Another great speaker on August 28, 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial here in Washington, D.C., and he spoke about the fierce urgency of now and the importance of hewing out of a mountain of despair a stone of hope. If you haven't had the chance to visit his memorial, please don't miss it while you're in Washington. I think it's just a remarkable memorial. Almost 50 years later, Dr. King's dream has not been fully realized. There are still mountains of despair across this country and around the world. It appears that some stones of hope must be accumulated pebble by pebble. Dr. King showed us the importance of hope, not only for the civil rights movement, but for all people. Not too long ago, I was preparing remarks for a presentation to social workers and other frontline responders for the Navajo Nation. In doing so, I came across a beautiful paper by the Honorable Robert Yazzie, Chief Justice of the Navajo Nation. The title of his paper was "Life Comes From It." In this paper, Justice Yazzie discusses the problems facing young people of his tribe, and he made the observation that all of their problems stem from a loss of hope. I think that's a remarkable statement, and if I were to ask each of you sitting in this audience the role that hope plays with the people you work with, you might also comment that it's a loss of hope that creates so many of our social problems. Another great social seer, Studs Terkel, in his final book called Further Thoughts from a Lifetime of Listening, noted, "Hope dies last. As long as we have hope, we'll be okay." And I've been a big admirer of Studs Terkel for a long time and his views on the social fabric of our society. Well, we all use and rely on hope, but we may not even understand it fully. During the next 3 days, important questions will be asked and answered about hope. For example, is hope universal? Well, philosophers, religious leaders, and most authors of great literature would answer in the affirmative. So would most social workers. But what is hope? How can we define it? How did we learn to hope? Is my way of hoping the same as yours? Are there cultural aspects to hope? Can hope actually be restored once it is lost? What is the relationship between hope and resiliency? And can we capture hope and use it clinically? In contrast to these questions, what do we actually know about hope? Well, first of all, we know that hope is not simple optimism. Too often, we get caught up in the optimistic person does better. But optimism is not the same as hope, and we need to make that distinction. We know that hope is not wishing, and we know that it does not equate with denial. And by definition, hope can never be false. In his book, The Anatomy of Hope, physician and researcher Jerome Groopman states that there is an authentic biology of hope, and that belief and expectation are key elements of hope. We know that hope is an essential experience of the human condition. It is a psychological asset, a guard against despair, a way of coping, and a quality of life enhancer. Václav Havel, the human rights activist, playwright, and president of the Czech Republic, he spent many years in prison because of his efforts against communist oppression. When he died this past December, journalists described him as the man who lived the truth. Havel frequently used the concept of hope in his activism and in his work. He said, this is a quote again, "Hope is a dimension of the soul, and it's not essentially dependent on some particular observation of the world or the estimate of a situation. It is a state of mind." The best definition that I have found of hope is a very short one. Hope is a way of thinking, feeling, and acting. Hope is a way of thinking, feeling, and acting. You can feel the power of hope. You can almost hold it literally in your hand. And when you feel it, you realize that in the presence of hope, anything is possible. We know that hope is flexible, evolving as situations and realities change. It has a time aspect and a consideration of the future. It is not a static concept. Hope changes as situations and circumstances change. Hope is complex. People learn to hope differently, and people define hope differently. My way of hoping may not be, in fact, probably is not, the same as your way of hoping. We have a tendency to think that everyone hopes in a similar fashion. But as a coping characteristic, hope is individualistic, and persons have various capacities for hoping and different approaches to maintaining hope. Personal hope is embedded in a broad social context. The way you hope develops within a particular family culture and within a historical framework and set of experiences. Families, in fact, have well-established ways of hoping. The way your family of origin views hope and the strategies they use to maintain it have had an impact on how you currently use hope. Recognizing family hope constellations is important for our clinical work because we can make errors when we're assuming that someone is hoping the same way we're hoping. I grew up in a family that was quite stoical. My daughter's here and she's heard this story. Tears were not allowed in our family. In fact, they had not been allowed for so long that I think that our genetic makeup stopped producing tears that you might use for crying. My mother always said, "This too will pass," and it always did. But my father had a different philosophy, one that is unusual. My father said, "You can get used to hanging if you hang long enough." Well, there was truth to that too. So in our family, you just absolutely went forward, and hope was a different type of hope from some other families. When I got married, a social worker, I married a man who was a mathematics major. That created a different kind of hope for our family. He believes in statistics. He believes in the odds. He believes in probability, which I've never quite understood. So our hoping from our family, from my family of origin to my current family, is a different type of hoping, and our children have a different approach to hoping, perhaps, than I and my siblings did. So we do know that there are family hope constellations, and we need to be aware of that as we go forward. In addition, I think there are different types of hope, and sometimes we forget about that. There is generalized hope. You're hoping for world peace. Something general is going to happen. And there is hope for achieving a particular goal. Professionals, perhaps too often, narrow their view to think in terms of therapeutic hope, which of course is hope based on the outcome of therapy. And those of you who have worked with individuals with chronic conditions or crisis situations, you know sometimes that you believe that their outcome won't be as good as you would like it to be, and that you feel that then it becomes a hopeless situation, but the person you're talking about may not feel that at all. And so we have to sort of set aside our therapeutic hope and think about the person we're working with and the individual hoping characteristics of that person. Having worked in oncology much of my career and hearing people say, "I don't want to give her false hope," and hearing patients say, "What does that mean, false hope?" You can give false reassurances, but you can never give false hope. So it's a fascinating concept when we talk about therapeutic hope. In contrast, though, to therapeutic hope, there is transcendent hope, hope that transcends reality. And sometimes the seemingly unreachable may become reachable. Also, we now know that hope may have larger scale applications in reducing risk and inoculating segments of society from despair. There are high hope individuals and low hope individuals. Their level of hope can be strengthened by caring social networks or diminished by neglect, abuse, and traumatic events. Some people, those who experience significant trauma, may become hope lost. An acute loss of hope, what some refer to as the death of hope, is very serious because a hopeless person becomes a helpless person. Hopelessness is a condition of inaction that affects the psychological, social, physical, and spiritual health and overall quality of life of an individual. It is much easier, and you know this, to prevent a person from becoming hopeless than to help a hope-lost person find hope again. As social workers, we know what 16th century poet John Donne describes so eloquently. When hope does awaken, an entire life awakens with it. How many clients have you seen that in? When they finally regain their hope, their entire life awakens. Preventing hopelessness and helping low hope and hope-lost individuals reframe and regain hope is the goal of our therapies and our efforts. In the face of even the direst situations, social workers remain hopeful. We understand how difficult it is for people to change and maintain, how hard it is to overcome suffering, setbacks, disappointments, loss, and just plain bad luck. Even knowing this, we don't give up when trying to help those in poverty, those with chronic mental illness, those who are addicted, or those on parole. We believe that families can be functional, workplaces can be healthy, and communities can be safe. Despite threats of terrorism and world unrest, we believe that peace is always preferable to war, and that we have a global obligation regarding world resources and all other peoples. This singular capacity to be hopeful about future change allows social workers to practice in prisons, in drug rehab clinics, in domestic violence shelters, in suicide prevention centers, in child protective services, and on the battlefield. It is hope that prevents the school social worker from giving up on the difficult teenager or the probation officer from giving up on a repeat offender. It is hope that encourages social workers to practice in areas struggling with unrelenting poverty and great challenges such as Appalachia, on some Indian reservations, and in inner cities. Because of hope, social workers choose to work in health and mental health settings despite the prevalence of incurable diseases or conditions. Because of hope for a better future, we serve in war-torn areas and in oppressed and dangerous countries. We do not live or work by denying the reality of the world today. Instead, we recognize that our collective hope transcends reality, and that our combined efforts will continue to improve the world in which we live. As social workers, we have a passion for social justice, for fairness, for making this world a better place. It is this purpose that forms the bedrock of our careers, but it is possibility and hope that keeps us moving forward. Does this mean that social work can lay claim to the profession of hope? I believe we can. We are holders of hope for our clients, our communities, and our society, dispensing it as a physician dispenses medicines, or as a judge dispenses justice, or as a mother dispenses love. We fully understand the power of hope. We recognize its utility, its essential function in solving both individual and community problems. Hope provides the framework and underlies most, if not all, of our social work interventions. You will hear about many of these successful interventions during this conference. For example, this morning you will hear 3 social work experts discuss how to build resiliency after trauma. One will describe work with survivors of torture, one with survivors of the Holocaust, and one with the integration of social services into a developing country. This afternoon, I mentioned Dr. Ken Doka, who is known for his work on disenfranchised grief and the differences between male and female grief. We'll talk about maintaining hope after the loss of a loved one. And after Ken, we are honored that Nobel Peace Prize winner and social work activist Lema Bowie will describe her activism in war-torn Liberia. Tomorrow, we will hear from a self-described cultural warrior about his work to combat poverty in the favelas of Rio. There will also be 2 plenaries tomorrow. The first is titled Hope for Our Children, and it will cover the topic of child welfare and types of interventions that help children at risk to overcome the significant impediments facing them. The afternoon plenary will address building hope with honor for veterans and military families. We have over 100 conference attendees who work for the Department of Veteran Affairs, for the Department of Defense, or are uniformed social workers themselves, and we welcome all of you, and we're happy you're at this conference. Because of the significant focus of this conference on social work with service members, Dr. Jill Biden, who started the Joining Forces initiative with First Lady Michelle Obama last year, they started the Joining Forces to encourage all Americans to support veterans and military families, and she will speak Wednesday morning. You should have gotten a little sheet about Dr. Biden in your packet. We were pleased when she talked with us and said she'd be happy to come and speak to social workers. And her daughter's a social worker, by the way. So we're happy to have Dr. Biden here. We also have a closing plenary with 2 young veterans who will discuss the challenges they overcame in order to devote their careers to social work, and a social worker who serves cancer survivors and uses the power of hope on a daily basis. And finally, on Wednesday, political commentator Donna Brazile will join us for an entertaining and enlightening view of the current state of politics in this election year. I asked Donna Brazile once why she didn't run for office. I don't know how many of you follow Donna, but most of us here do. We think she's wonderful. I said, why don't you yourself run for office? And she said, because I can't keep my mouth shut, and I'm always in trouble. So you will enjoy Donna. Add to this the almost 200 breakout sessions that cover hope and resiliency in all types of settings, and the breadth of social work becomes clear. We all came to the profession of social work to make a difference, to bring about positive social change, to better society. We could have chosen other professions, but we didn't. We chose social work. But we recognize there are some days, weeks, and even months when our professional hoping capacity seems low. When we are discouraged and we feel ineffective. Perhaps that is one of the reasons you are attending this conference. If so, we believe you will be inspired by your colleagues and by the keynote and plenary presenters. We believe you will leave energized and with your own hope restored. If you ever doubt the importance of your work or the importance of the profession, take a moment to think about what the world would be like without social workers. If the profession of social work ended this decade, would it matter? Would it matter to those who are marginalized and devalued? Would it matter to those who live in poverty or who are invisible to the greater society? Would it matter to children who are being abused and mistreated, or to the elderly who are trying to overcome obstacles to aging well? Would it matter to all those who have lost hope and see no way forward? I contend that it would matter, and matter greatly. The world would be a much less hospitable and less caring place without social work. As a profession, we have the potential, the social work potential, to make a great difference. Dr. Dorothy I. Height, a social work pioneer, a Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient, and the only woman on the dais when Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech, and I have to add, one of my personal heroes said, "We hold in our hands the power to shape not only our own, but the nation's destiny." That is the incredible power of social work.